learned about your team since that Quinnipiac game on Saturday?
Care, work ethic. Our guys felt it after, and it's one loss, right? But at the end of the day, the standard is a standard, and leaving some play on the table on Saturday night didn't sit well after the game, didn't sit well on Sunday, and through the tough practices that we've had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday here, the guys' care and their work ethic is at a high level, and they're ready to go this weekend.
The guys were talking about practicing on the Olympic sheet this week. What are some of the biggest takeaways that you try to do on that ice that you can't do on your main one here?
Well, again, I think making sure that time and space is a big deal, right? Like at the end of the day, when you're playing on a big sheet of ice, and if there's quick puck movement, you have to be sharp in your execution on your play away from the puck, and you got to make sure you're underneath guys, and you're playing five as a tight unit on the ice, and there's no gaps in your play. And I think once you do get the puck, then you can spread it out and get going up the ice and get going on transition. But for us, it's playing on a bigger sheet of the rink and making sure that all five guys are playing and taking away time and space.
How fun are games against the Gophers for you?
I don't know if there's anything that matches it in college hockey. One of the most historic rivalries in the game, something that we're doing every year, playing each other, which is awesome. But again, I think it's a situation where, the guys that have played in those series know how intense and how fast and how physical those series are. And the new guys coming in, learning about it from the older guys as far as what to expect going forward. And I think it's a situation here where I know both sides obviously are very excited to play this series.
How fun is it? You kind of alluded to it, the fact that this rivalry can still keep going, too. A lot of people didn't think it would with the split of the conferences.
Yeah, well, again, a situation when each team found their own new conference a few years back, it was a situation where even though it is an intense rivalry, we know how storied it is and want to keep the tradition going. But even more so, too, is the fans. The fans absolutely love it. I know our fans look forward to it. They circle it on the calendar every year, whether it's here or whether it's down in Minneapolis and going down there and traveling. And I know their fan base does as well. Sometimes when you get into a league and there's not kind of an intense rivalry, this is one that's always been there for a long, long time.
There might be a year off coming up with the rivalry. Is this something you guys want to get back at some point?
Yeah. Yeah, so the contract ends next year.
Yeah.
And then after that, yeah, for sure. And I think it's one of those things that we always try to build it in. I think, when we talk about the things that we like to do every year, Bemidji is always a year, they're not in our league, but, they're 2 hours down the road, have tremendous respect for them. Situations like that where we want to restore those rivalries. Even Mankato, that's coming up here in the next year or two, too, as far as making sure that, we're playing against good, hard teams. But again, it sharpens you when you play against good teams.
Does it feel like you guys aren't going upstairs to practice? I mean, when you first were here as an assistant, it was like almost every other week because there's so many Olympic rinks. And does it feel like you're not going up there as much anymore?
Yeah, it does. And I got to be honest with you. I like practicing on our main sheet. It's, I think it's not only because it's an NHL sheet, but like when you start barking or start talking on the ice, and our players too, like, you can hear each other. When you go up to the Olympic rink, it's a big, wide open area. Kind of the acoustics are a little bit not as good as down here, and it takes away a little bit. But again, you have to practice in those settings, and you're exactly right. Colorado College went away from the big rink. Situations here where I think Minnesota is, actually going to contract their rink a little bit next year. But yeah, I think a lot of venues have shaped it into NHL rinks, which permits us to practice on the NHL rink.
So it's not just these road games coming up against Minnesota, but it's going to be a long stretch of road games up until November 11th. What do you do to stay focused with your team throughout a long stretch being away from home?
I think you just hit it on the head. Stay focused on that exact match that you're having. And again, Friday night, Minnesota, and then Saturday night in Minnesota. You got to stay focused on your current weekend, what you're doing. Yeah, we stayed at home here for the first few weeks, and now we're on the road for the next 3 weeks. And it's easy to get ahead of yourself. Like, obviously people are talking about the Hall of Fame game in Vegas. We're not thinking about the Hall of Fame game in Vegas. We're thinking about this weekend in Minneapolis on Friday night. And I think the word focus of the short-term side of it is a big deal for us, and I know our guys have that in mind.
I'm guessing that it is Minnesota. You don't worry too much about your guys thinking ahead when that's this upcoming.
No, for sure. Obviously they're number one in the country right now in the polls. But at the end of the day, again, like we talked about it after the game. For us, polls are just a magnitude or a measurement of where you're at this time of the season, where what we have to do is make sure that we keep building and growing our group to get to that level. And at the end of the year, that's when it really matters. For us right now, we're going against a really good team that's had a weekend off last weekend, and they're going to be energized and ready to play. We have to make sure that we are. And I know going through the first week of 3 days of practice this week, we've had some really sharp, hard practices here.
No, with the Olympic rink, the angles can be a little different for goalies too. Does it help that, DeRitter's played here at this rink a bunch, Jacobs played in Olympic rinks in Sweden a bunch?
Yeah.
Does that help to have two guys that have experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Drew has obviously played in the Big Ten with Michigan State and played a ton of games in there. And, you're exactly right with Jacob Helston on the Olympic-sized rinks in Europe, too. But to me, I think, staying current, we always say about, staying current all the time. And, for us practicing having the availability of having an Olympic rink here is a huge, huge deal of staying current and practicing. And not only for goaltenders, but, line rushes, whether you're on the offensive attack or whether you're defending off the rush, it's a big deal as far as our D and our forwards making sure that we know that the spacing out there is a little bit bigger.
No, the game's changed a little bit, but can a guy like Tyler Kleven still make an impact with the physicality?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the big thing with Tyler Kleven, like obviously he's a physical player, right? But his feet are so good and his reach is so good. And when you talk about being on a big rink, that's why I like a guy like that is very I guess, important or impactful because he can take away time and space with his feet, but also with his reach, how long his reach is. And again, like I said, it's a situation where, we're leaning on him for good defensive play.
What does he do well that allows him to make some big hits? And has he changed a little bit? Last year I noticed he was hitting a little bit different. He was, backing into guys sometimes.
Yeah, I think just the pre-puck awareness side of it. I think when you had the first part of your question asking, what makes him effective that way, I think knowing that anticipating where the puck is going to go and having a tight gap on a player when he can do that instead of having big, long gaps and not having the opportunity to do that. And then the other thing I think on him is I think he's really magnified his game a little bit instead of being up and out of going and what you're talking about leaning into him with your backside. He's more in a controlled situation now, I think, where hopefully the penalties won't get called as much because of the way he's kind of disciplined his game and controlled his game as far as the checking side of it.
Do you remember when he was at the USA Hockey National, when you guys were recruiting him, I remember there was a national festival where he made a pretty big impact and everyone was offering him after that. Do you remember what kind of caught your guys' eye from his play that you guys thought that?
Yeah. Well, you know what? We watched him a lot when he was playing high school here in Fargo, and he was a bigger guy than everybody else. And sometimes when you're recruiting players, you go, well, okay, is he just bigger than everybody else? Is everybody else going to catch up to him? And you know what? He stayed ahead of the curve, I firmly believe, because he invested in himself, not only as that physical package, but his puck skills, his skating skills. And then when he started to go to higher levels at the National Development Program, when you're playing with all the other elite players in the country of his age group, he kept continuing to grow his game. And I don't think there's too many guys that are 6'4" that have the feet that he does, that has a competitive level that he does, that has the good puck skills that he has, that has that in a combined package. And sure, absolutely, he's growing his game for his first 3 years here, and he's going to continue to get better. But for us, that was attractive to see a young man like that that's willing to do that and invest himself and come into our environment.
Well, so you kind of touched on it, but are some of his puck skills overlooked because of maybe the physical?
I really do. I do. I like when you see him going back, and like for me, when you go see a defenseman going back for a puck, you want him to have that pre-puck awareness of where the first outlet is. Always try to move that to your first option. He's done a pretty good job of that. The other thing is snapping a puck on a tape instead of just, kind of just lazily throwing a puck up the ice and letting a forward come back for it. He'll snap it right on the tape right away, that firmness of his passing. And then the other thing for me is like he's starting to play a little bit on offense and jumping up on the play and supporting the rush, and we all know that he has a bomb of a shot. He's not afraid to use it on that side of it. And then once he gets in the offensive zone, I think he's not afraid to move. He's not afraid to get off the corner of the blue line, get to the middle of the ring, shoot a puck, not afraid to go down a wall and interchange with a forward and just kind of have that a little bit of confidence on the offensive side, which wasn't probably there a lot his first year or two, and he's starting to grow his game a little bit.